Okay, so recently I posted this orchestral composition that I made on my Instagram, and a couple men were asking me to break this down, do a tutorial. So here we go. So started off with these really simple basic chords in some strings. This is the Sad Day cello from Augmented Strings intro, and we've got this very simple EQ cutting a few highs and a lot of lows. Next I added this, it's hard to describe, it's like these strings that sort of slide down as the note goes along. Here, I'll play it. This is the falling strings patch again from Augmented Strings intro, and literally the exact same EQ on it. Next I added this sub bass from Vital, just to sort of give a bit more of that low end that we kind of cut out from the strings. Like I said, this sub bass is from Vital, and we've got a simple EQ cutting a lot of the mids and a lot of the highs just to make sure it's purely bass. Next up, I added this texture string thing to sort of give the track more high ends and really just fill it out, fill up the space. This is where the mixing gets kind of interesting. I added Ozone 2 imager to sort of make the sound wider, stereoize it a bit. EQ's pretty simple though. Cuts out some lows, a little bit of the really high frequencies, so that it's not too harsh of a frequency. We still want to keep some of the high end, but just not the really harsh ones. And this is the dark drone patch from Augmented Strings intro. And to top it all off, I added a piano. You can't go wrong with a piano, can you? And you might have noticed that for the bass notes of the piano, I've kind of played around with the velocities of the notes a bit to give it more rhythm. The piano is the wide ribbon Studio Grand from Addictive Keys. We've got a reverb on it and an EQ. Now in the mixer track, you can see at the bottom of the screen, all the strings mixer tracks are linked to this one track, which I've named it the strings bus. The reason is because on the strings bus, I've added a sidechain. I added a sidechain later on when I added in the kick. You'll see that in action later. But that's the tutorial for what I like to call the first section of the track. This is how it all sounds together. The drums are really simplistic. It's literally just this kick hitting on every beat. And if you play it with the rest of the stuff at that time, you can hear the sidechain sort of making the strings fade in and out. In terms of mixing the actual kick itself, all I have is a couple EQs cutting out a lot of the highs. Then I added this thing. This is like a vocal loop that I made with my own voice. It kind of acts as like a percussion loop, as like a texture in the background. It sounds weird on its own, but it fits really nicely with the rest of it. Yeah, you can tell I added a lot of effects to it when I actually made the loop. You can see a lot of these like effects and risers. I'll go over them at the end of the tutorial. Now to start off what I like to call the second part of the track, we have this chord progression with the same strings that we started off with. Now the chord progression starts off pretty simple, but it gets more complex, and it's actually, you can see it's a lot wider and bigger than the first chord progression. And then I came back and made a second pattern with the same falling strings from before. It's a longer pattern again. Again, the exact same sub bass, just a longer pattern. You know the drill by now, same texture but a longer pattern. And then to finish it off, I added this choir, and it literally just follows the chord progression. The choir is from a plugin called Virgin Choir, and the only reason there's a limiter on here is because I also sidechained this to the kick, and there's another EQ just cutting lots of lows and a few highs. Then I added this vocal sample that I've chopped up and added some effects to, which basically follow the choir. It adds like another layer to the vocal. But a bit of a problem here. So if you go into here, you can see I panned some of these to the left and to the right. But I'm not even joking. Mid-recording this, my left speaker broke, and now only my right one works. So you're only going to be able to hear some of these when I play them. But yeah, sorry about that, but here's the thing. Silence is so weird. You will be able to hear this if you check out the track on my Instagram. It's so weird. Then I added a couple orchestral drum samples. So this is like a snare sample from a free kit that you can download on YouTube. I forgot the name, I'm sorry, but it's free, you can probably find it. And then I added a second one to give it like a faster pace, a bit more rhythm. These are the effects for that vocal sample that I added. An EQ sort of boosting some of the high mids, cutting the lows and a bit of the highs. I made this volume envelope with a Fruity Love filter. It's kind of like a sidechain, but I just used that as a sidechain before I added the kick in, and then Fruity Limiter just to make sure that it actually sidechains when I added the kick in. And then for the snare sample, I have this EQ cutting a lot of the lows, some of the low mids, and a lot of the highs. A bit of reverb in there as well, and of course a sidechain. And then this is how the whole of the second part sounds together. Okay, now let's get to the boring bit. I added this sort of effects that act as like a cymbal or a crash on the beats. And then there's these risers down here, which are literally just different crashes that I've taken and just reversed them. For mixing the effects, I added a reverb, an EQ, boosting some of the high mids and cutting out some of the super highs, and a pancake to basically keep it panning from left to right. And then for the cymbals or risers, I added an EQ cutting out the lows and some of the highs, and also a reverb again. And that's basically that. I'm just going to go through the arrangement quickly. I'm not going to play the whole thing because that's just going to take too long, and this is already a fairly long tutorial. Before the arrangement, part 1 starts off with the main chords, the texture, and the kind of string accents. Oh, I didn't even go through them, did it? Shit. Okay, back in part 1, I added this like string accent to go along with the chords. This violin is the Il Violino preset from Augmented Strings intro. We've got an EQ cutting the lows and some of the highs. I was gonna add pancake to it, but I decided against it. I added Valhalla Supermassive to give it this like weird modded robotic reverb kind of thing, and then another EQ, basically just cutting out some of the harsh frequencies. You might be able to still hear some of them, depends what you're listening on. I tried my best, but yeah. Okay, now we can actually go through the arrangement. So part 1 starts off with just the main chords, the texture, and the string accent that we just went through. Then it's got a riser into a crash, and then we add in the falling strings and the piano. Another riser, another crash. We add in the first drop with the kick, the vocal perk loop thing, and the bass. Then in the second part of the drop, we add that little crash effect. And then it goes into this like bridge breakdown section where it starts off with part 2, so we've got the more complex chord progression, the longer texture pattern, and the choir that backs up the chord progression. A little bit into the second part, we've got the first snare ensemble sample thing, and then halfway through we add the second snare sample and the crash effects and the vocal perk loop. Then we add both risers to really buff up the intensity, and we go into the second drop with the kick, the sampled vocal, the effects, and everything from part 2. And then after that, we finish off going back to the original part 1 with the original main chords, falling strings, bass, texture, string accent, and the piano. And then finish off with the outro with just the chords, the strings, and the piano. But yeah, that's the tutorial. Hope this was helpful. And if you want to listen to the full thing, it's on my Instagram page. So go follow that up, and yeah, see ya.